What's cracking, everybody? My name's Mr. Berger.
And my name is Two Fangs.
Tonight, we're gonna take a look at this giant skeleton cannon cart bait deck. That's right, it's a giant skeleton cannon cart bait deck. But before we do that, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that little burger down there to subscribe. You can ring that little bell icon on my channel page to make sure that you don't miss out on any of my live streams. You can rage at me on Reddit, tweet me on Twitter, inspect me on Instagram, or find me on Facebook. If you're interested in coming on the channel as a guest, or think you might want to do a collaboration, or even just want a shout out in one of my videos, then go ahead and leave a comment in the comments section, or send me an email with my email address listed below. And now, on to tonight's explosive video.
I make money when I talk. I'm a boss, take a loss.
So I'm really excited to do tonight's video because this is a really cool, interesting, off-meta deck. So let's go ahead and go over strategy first like we usually do. Maybe talk about a couple card replacements, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. And then let's talk about a few replays. I want to try to make this video a little bit shorter than usual because, you know, audience retention shows that people don't usually watch the full 20 or 30 minute video. Alright, so first things first. This deck has the potential to crush many of the current meta decks. So it annihilates Three Musketeers, it can shut down Siege very well, and you know it's pretty decent against like beatdown and cycle decks as well. So it's really good against a lot of the current meta decks. So the Giant Skeleton, let's talk about him first, and let's talk about him a lot in this deck, because he's kind of like the MVP in this deck, right? He's kind of like your most interesting off-meta and most powerful, so to speak, card. So the Giant Skeleton, he is a defensive powerhouse. So if he connects to the tower after he defends, then he will blow it up. If he connects to a tower, it takes out like half of the tower's health just with his death damage alone, not counting his auto attacks or whatever is behind him. Now, when I was talking about him being a defensive powerhouse, I meant that, let's say you play him on defense and he dies to the enemy support. Then the enemy support comes along and they walk right to where his bomb dropped and they all explode. So if you place him on their giant or their golem and then he dies, the witch or the wizard or the Ewiz behind that tank will run up and die to the Giant Skeleton's bomb. And then he goes on to that really threatening counter push where if he connects to an enemy tower, he's absolutely devastating. And even if he doesn't connect, he provides so much threat that they absolutely have to answer it, which you can play to your advantage. So a few things that really stand out in this deck. Well, obviously, you know, the Giant Skeleton, right? So the Giant Skeleton, we'll talk about him again and again, but let's talk about a couple other things. Well, Spear Goblins. Spear Goblins instead of the Ice Spirit is something that really stood out to me when I first started looking at this deck. And I've noticed this a lot in a lot of the more recent bait decks. You know, there's a version with the Dark Prince and the Bandit, and it also runs Spear Goblins, and I was messing around with that. I bet I could even do like a double Prince bait deck before the new patch comes in. It would probably be really strong. So Spear Goblins are really cool. They're really cheap, similar to the Ice Spirit, which is what you normally run in a bait deck. And they're not quite as cheap, but they really play that log baity, spell zap baity kind of role, because they're just as susceptible to a log or a zap as many of the other cards in here. And in fact, I feel like they're more susceptible to a log or especially a zap than an Ice Spirit would be. So you're providing another element of bait to this deck. Now on top of this, we have the cannon cart in this deck. Now the cannon cart is very interesting. So we'll talk about the cannon cart more a little bit later, but it's really strong and it's actually really fast, so you can play it pretty aggressively. So this deck did get 20 wins in the CRL challenge, and in fact there were quite a few decks that ran Giant Skeleton that got 20 wins in said challenge. So how do we play this deck? Well, if you want to take a look at some of my previous log bait videos on more strategies on how to play log bait, you can do so. I'll link a card up above there. And let's just basically consider it comparable to that. You play it very similar to the classic log bait. You punish with your Goblin Barrel after they waste their log, and you protect your princess. Now getting back to the Giant Skeleton for a little bit. Most opponents will do one of two things when they see your Giant Skeleton. They will either under-defend against it, which will allow them to connect to the tower, which will destroy it, or they will over-commit to it. And that'll allow you to take advantage of this positive elixir trade. So you're going to look out for either of those things and act accordingly. So if they underdefend and he connects to the tower, he will absolutely destroy it. If they overdefend, then you can punish in the opposite lane. Now he kills all their support with his death. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'm saying it again because it's really important. I want to stress it. So he absolutely destroys all the support behind the tank. He destroys the double princes if the Dark Prince has his shield down on his death damage with his bomb. So I think he's really underrated, possibly one of the most underrated cards in Clash Royale. There are a lot of 20-win decks that ran a giant skeleton, but I think this one is really cool, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So talk about Siege for a second again. I mean, it absolutely blows up Expo. It squelches it. It shuts it down. You just place it right in front of the Expo, and they're going to spam at the bridge there in front of their Expo, but he will probably go through, and then when he dies, his death damage just destroys the Expo. Or Mortar, too. Alright? So against 3 Musketeers, you can use him to defend against the heavier lane. So in the CWA video that did this, I'll go ahead and provide a link to that as well. They talk about how they're probably going to provide more support on the lane with the 2 Musketeers. But I feel like I've talked to other people and sometimes they support the 1 Musketeer lane a little bit more because you're less likely to counter that. But then, you know, that's like going back and forth between what's in your head and what's in their head. So, hey, feel out your opponent and see what you think is best and act accordingly when you're going up against 3 Musketeers. Alright. So, generally, you want to use him, the Giant Skeleton, on defense, or you want to use him as kind of a spam at the bridge to provide a very large amount of threat to your opponent. Rarely do you place him in the back for a big beatdown. And in fact, the first time I was recording videos for this, I did that a lot. And I felt like maybe I was doing something a little bit wrong, and I went over the tips again on some of the other videos and stuff that people made. And, you know, I decided, yeah, that's actually a really good tip. You want to use him defensively or to provide a lot of pressure in one lane, kind of on the bridge. Alright, so he synergizes amazingly with Tornado. And in fact, I'm going to show some replays later, and I'll try to point that out, where he just, his bomb drops, right? And then you suck everything in with the Tornado, and then it just absolutely destroys their whole army, because the bomb death damage does so much damage. It's crazy. Alright, so let's go back to the cannon cart a little bit. How do you use the cannon cart, and how do you use it in this specific deck? So what you're going to do with the cannon cart, well, a few things actually. You can use it as a kind of surprise factor. These off-meta cards, especially one like the cannon cart, which has very low usage rates right now, especially in like lower arenas. You know, I know that it does see some high usage rates in higher arenas, or at least it did for a while. Regardless, these off-meta cards, they're not going to expect them. You can catch them off guard. And see what I did there? I just sent in the cannon cart right away, and it took out like half of that tower's health. So you can surprise them, you can use it at the bridge there, and you can use it as a kind of bridge spam element to this deck, which you see a lot actually in this deck. You're providing a lot of like pressure and threat, and you don't have any heavy spells, so I can't shut down that pump, so I try to take advantage of pushing and providing a lot of threat in the right lane there. Now, they might actually log your cannon cart. Now, if they do this, this is really good. And why would they do this? Well, as I mentioned, cannon cart is not very common. It's not something that you see a whole lot, so some people might not know how to react to it. And if you use it as one of your first cards, right, then they might panic and log. They're like, oh, it's running up really quickly. I don't want it to connect to my tower and do a bunch of damage. So they log it and they push it back. And that's really good for you because that allows you to push in with your Goblin Gang, or ideally your Goblin Barrel, which is kind of one of your most powerhouse, deadly, damage-dealing, win condition cards in this deck. Alright. Yeah, guys, remember that. It's a bait deck, so punish with your Goblin Barrel, build up those princesses, protect those princesses, get multiple princesses on the field, so on and so forth. And back to the cannon cart here, alright? The cannon cart, he counters siege really well too, so it's another thing in this deck that allows you to shut down siege very well. If you place him right in front of a siege tower, which is an Expo or a mortar, then he'll lock onto it and he'll blow it up. And he locks on really quickly and he moves really quickly, so he runs right up to it. With his range, he just locks on. And one-on-one, he'll definitely take out an Expo. So that's the cannon cart. So let's talk about single elixir versus double elixir play with this particular deck. So in single elixir play, you don't want to be too aggressive. You want to be a little bit defensive. And let's look at an example of being defensive and using that tornado giant skeleton synergy right here. So what I do is I place the giant skeleton in front. See, it locks onto his golem. All the support locks onto the giant skeleton. He tornadoes all my stuff together. Look what I do here though. The bomb drops, I tornado everything in together, and it absolutely devastates his army. It completely shuts it down. I take some good damage to my tower there, but I completely destroy his massive push with that combo between the tornado and the giant skeleton. So in single elixir, play defensive. Don't be too aggressive, right? Against a pump, you do want to play aggressive actually, and you saw me do that earlier because you don't have any heavy spells. Now, I like to use the Goblin Barrel on elixir pumps a lot. I think it works out pretty well. But you do want to make sure that you're distracting them in one lane or the other, ideally the opposite lane of where their pump is placed, so that when they send in, or you send in your Goblin Barrel, then it locks onto their pump and they're answering the opposite lane. They react to like your cannon cart that you sent in to pressure them in the right lane, and then you send in your Goblin Barrel in the left lane right after. And since they're answering the cannon cart in the right lane, like so, then you can safely send in your Goblin Barrel and try to devastate their elixir pump. Now this is a little bit of a risky play, but sometimes it catches them off guard and it works out really well. So against pumps, you do play a little bit more aggressively because you don't have any heavy spells. Now in double elixir, obviously you're going to be playing a little bit more aggressively as well. So you're going to try to get as many princesses on the field as you can. Alright, you're going to protect those princesses. You're going to lean on your giant skeleton. You're going to use him for defense, and you're also going to use him to provide a lot of pressure. And of course you can play a lot of bridge spammy like moves by pressuring with like your goblin gang, or even your spear goblins at the bridge, or your Goblin Barrel, which you want to be getting on the field a lot too. So opening moves really quickly. Well, one thing that I noticed, as I mentioned earlier, that was interesting is that this deck runs Spear Goblins instead of Ice Spirit. So you can actually open with your Spear Goblins at the bridge. And the reason why I like to do this is that actually might cause them to waste their log or their zap really early. And in that case, it's an equal elixir trade for you rather than a negative elixir trade for you. Whereas if you use your princess, your Goblin Barrel, or your Goblin Gang, and they log or zap it, obviously they can't zap your princess, so they log it, then that's a negative trade for you, because it costs you 3, and it only costs them 2. Alright, so, opening moves. I use the Spear Goblins at the bridge, I use Goblin Gang at the bridge, if I don't have that in hand. Sometimes I place a princess in the back, depending on what I see them placing, or what my opening hand is. And occasionally, I'll open with a Goblin Barrel. If I do that, I make sure to place it on the corner of the Princess Tower furthest away from their King Tower, because that makes it so that if they tornado, it will not pull the goblins into their King Tower and activate it. If you place it anywhere else, they have the chance to tornado it into their King Tower and activate it, and that's bad news for you all game in any match. So you want to avoid that if possible, until you find out that they don't have a tornado in their deck. And since we're talking about opening moves, that's what you want to do as your opener, because you're not sure yet if they have a tornado. Alright. So I guess you could pressure with Giant Skeleton or put him in the back, but that's kind of, those are the main openers that I would do. So card replacements, well, it's a bait deck. So if you're going to do any card replacements, you basically want to do things that are susceptible to log, because this, in theory, is a log bait deck. So there's sometimes more zap in the meta, so maybe you want things that are susceptible to zap too, but I think that you want things that are mostly susceptible to log. So replacing, you know, the Goblin Gang or the Spear Goblins, I guess you could go with like regular goblins if you had to, or guards or something might be fun. You could always throw in an Ice Spirit in there to make it a little bit cheaper. If you don't have Princess, you could obviously use a Dark Goblin. That's kind of my go-to replacement. If you're changing out Giant Skeleton, it kind of changes the archetype of the deck, but you could always run a classic bait deck and just run like a Knight or a Valkyrie or an Ice Golem, some sort of mini tank like that. If you're going to change out the Cannon Cart, just run another similar elixir cost range support card, you know, Musketeer or E-Wiz or something like that. But I think the Cannon Cart's pretty fun. It's pretty cool. Makes this deck pretty interesting. Now let's just run through my plays here for this last replay, and then we'll call it a video. So at this point, I use the giant skeleton, and it's going on offense. The bomb, it doesn't get any value. I have to answer that skeleton army there, but actually the princess shoots over from the right lane, and that just talks, or is a testament to the value of the princess. She stays alive for a long time, and her massive range allows her to defend against both lanes at the same time. Now I use the cannon card on defense there, and it's going to provide a little bit of threat on offense here, and he has to answer. I like to put the goblin gang or the spear goblins behind my cannon cart or my giant skeleton as it goes in for a counter push, providing a lot more threat, and if they don't answer it, it'll punish them big time and do a bunch of damage to the tower. I mean, a cannon card alone will lock onto a tower and just wreck it. I don't think it kills it, but it'll do a ton of damage. Even a goblin gang takes out like half the tower's health. It's pretty crazy. Those spear goblins get some really good chip damage off. She's trying to give me a kiss here. Hi, Two Fangs. And then don't ever kiss your reptile. You could they could carry certain things that you don't want to kiss them for. Go ahead and kiss your dog or your cat, but not your pet snake. Alright, anyway, getting back to the match here. One really powerful thing with this deck is you do have that heavy tank, which is the giant skeleton. So if you send him in first and then you send in a goblin gang, then he tanks for it. Or even better, a goblin barrel. He tanks for that goblin barrel. And man, a goblin barrel with a tank in front of it just wreaks havoc on a tower. Because the tank is just soaking up all this damage. The tower is not chipping away and destroying those goblins. And man, spear goblins, or stab goblins, excuse me, do so much damage if they're allowed to lock onto something for a long period of time. They just can't take much, so they're easy to get rid of. So at this point, I'm kind of just playing defense. Looks like somebody's watching me and cheering me on. Maybe it was one of my fans or one of my friends or one of my clanmates. So since I locked in the one tower, I decided, okay, I'm just going to play defense. At the end here, I think he pretty much left. So yeah, that was that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure you leave some comments below on what you want to see in the future. If you want to connect for a collaboration or anything, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Thanks so much, guys, and have a good night.